My daughter-in-law, Sandra, stood up at my retirement party, raised her champagne glass, and announced to the entire room, "Here's to Eleanor finally stepping aside so the real professionals can take over." Completely unaware that the washed-up old secretary she was trying to humiliate in front of 200 guests was actually the silent majority shareholder of the very marketing agency where she worked, and the unsigned document I quietly slipped into her purse that night would make her realize she had just committed career suicide at the one event that was supposed to celebrate my supposed exit from relevance. My name is Eleanor Marie Blackwood, and I am 70 years old. If you had been sitting at one of those elegantly decorated tables at the Grand Ballroom of the Riverside Country Club that warm October evening, watching my retirement celebration unfold, you would have seen exactly what Sandra Chen-Morrison saw. An elderly woman who had spent 45 years working as an executive assistant at Morrison Associates Marketing Agency, dutifully organizing schedules, managing correspondence, and supporting the real decision-makers who built successful careers while I remained quietly in the background, invisible and undervalued. You would have observed me graciously accepting congratulations from colleagues who spoke about my dedicated service and loyal support, with the kind of patronizing warmth reserved for faithful employees who never quite achieved professional significance. You might have noticed how the agency's current leadership team, led by my son David Morrison and his ambitious wife Sandra, spoke about my contributions with respectful appreciation that barely concealed their relief at finally being free from the old-fashioned administrative approaches that had supposedly been holding back the company's modernization efforts. You would have watched Sandra, the agency's newly promoted creative director, networking effortlessly among the guests, prominent business leaders, media executives, and industry professionals who had gathered to acknowledge my lifetime of service while actually celebrating the agency's transition to younger, more innovative leadership under her strategic vision and contemporary marketing expertise. You would have seen me wearing a modest navy blue dress from a department store, carrying a simple leather handbag, and accepting gift certificates and small tokens of appreciation with the grateful humility expected from someone whose greatest achievement was maintaining efficient filing systems and remembering everyone's coffee preferences for nearly half a century. If you had been listening to the conversations around you, you would have heard guests discussing Sandra's impressive rise through the company ranks, her sophisticated understanding of digital marketing trends, and her ambitious plans for expanding the agency's client portfolio and service offerings. You might have noticed how naturally she commanded attention and respect from industry leaders, who clearly viewed her as the future of Morrison and Associates. You would have witnessed Sandra's confident presentation of the agency's 5-year growth strategy, complete with detailed market analysis, competitive positioning plans, and revenue projections that demonstrated her comprehensive understanding of the advertising industry's evolving landscape. Her PowerPoint presentation included sophisticated data visualizations, client testimonials, and strategic partnerships that painted a picture of dynamic leadership ready to transform a traditional agency into a cutting-edge marketing powerhouse. If you had observed the room during Sandra's presentation, you would have seen influential executives nodding approvingly at her strategic insights, potential clients expressing interest in her innovative service offerings, and industry competitors acknowledging her as a formidable new force in Chicago's competitive marketing landscape. The respect and admiration she commanded from the business community was genuine and well-earned, through years of successful campaign development and client relationship management. You would have watched me sitting quietly at the head table, smiling politely as speaker after speaker thanked me for my years of faithful service, while simultaneously emphasizing how excited they were about the fresh perspectives and innovative approaches that Sandra would bring to the agency's strategic direction now that the transition to new leadership was finally complete. During the cocktail hour before dinner, you might have overheard conversations between agency staff members discussing their relief that the company would finally modernize its operational procedures, embrace contemporary technology solutions, and eliminate the bureaucratic inefficiencies that had frustrated younger employees who felt constrained by outdated administrative protocols and traditional business practices. You would have seen Sandra graciously accepting congratulations from clients who praised her creative vision, strategic thinking, and professional competence, while occasionally glancing in my direction with expressions that suggested polite tolerance for the retiring secretary whose presence was necessary for social courtesy, but whose departure would free everyone to focus on serious business discussions without accommodating outdated perspectives and old-fashioned approaches. If you had been present during the networking sessions, you would have observed Sandra discussing complex marketing strategies with Fortune 500 executives, analyzing consumer behavior trends with academic researchers, and negotiating potential partnership agreements with technology companies that specialized in digital advertising platforms and data analytics services. Her conversations demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of industry best practices, regulatory compliance requirements, and emerging market opportunities that positioned her as a credible strategic partner rather than simply another creative services provider. You might have noticed how smoothly Sandra transitioned between different groups of guests, adjusting her communication style to match the professional context while maintaining consistent messaging about Morrison & Associates' competitive advantages and growth potential. Her networking skills were impressive and effective, generating genuine interest from potential clients and strategic partners who viewed her as the type of forward-thinking leader they preferred to work with in contemporary business environments. You would have seen her exchanging business cards with executives from major corporations, scheduling follow-up meetings with potential clients, and discussing collaborative opportunities with other agency leaders who recognized her as a peer rather than a subordinate. The professional relationships she was building that evening represented significant value for the agency's future growth and market positioning. During the formal dinner portion of the evening, you would have watched Sandra deliver a toast that acknowledged my years of service while positioning herself as the natural successor who would honor the agency's legacy while transforming it for future success. Her speech was well-crafted and diplomatically appropriate, expressing gratitude for my contributions while clearly establishing her authority and vision for the company's future direction. You might have observed how she referenced specific achievements and milestones from the agency's history, demonstrating her knowledge of the company's development, while subtly emphasizing how her leadership would address the challenges and opportunities that required contemporary expertise and innovative thinking. Her presentation balanced respect for tradition with enthusiasm for progress in ways that satisfied both longtime clients and potential new business partners. If you had been listening carefully to her remarks, you would have heard Sandra discussing the agency's plans for expanding into new market segments, developing advanced service offerings, and implementing cutting-edge technology solutions that would differentiate Morrison & Associates from competitors who had failed to adapt to changing industry conditions and client expectations. You would have seen her outlining specific initiatives for improving operational efficiency, enhancing client satisfaction, and attracting top talent to the agency through competitive compensation packages and professional development opportunities that reflected her understanding of contemporary workforce management and human resource strategies. You might have noticed how she presented detailed financial projections that demonstrated the agency's growth potential under her leadership, including revenue targets, profit margin improvements, and market expansion goals that impressed guests with their sophistication and realistic assessment of competitive opportunities and challenges. Throughout the evening, you would have observed Sandra's interactions with my son David, who clearly supported his wife's professional ambitions and shared her vision for modernizing the agency's operations and strategic positioning. Their partnership appeared strong and complementary, with David providing operational expertise while Sandra focused on creative strategy and business development initiatives. You would have seen how David introduced Sandra to key contacts from his professional network, endorsed her qualifications and achievements, and expressed confidence in her ability to lead the agency through its next phase of growth and development. His support was genuine and enthusiastic, reflecting his belief that Sandra's leadership would benefit both the company and their family's financial security. If you had been present during their private conversations with important guests, you would have heard David and Sandra discussing their shared goals for the agency's future, their complementary skills and expertise, and their commitment to maintaining the company's reputation while expanding its market reach and service capabilities. Their collaboration appeared well coordinated and mutually supportive in ways that suggested effective partnership in both personal and professional contexts. You might have noticed how they worked together to manage different aspects of the evening's networking opportunities, with David focusing on operational and technical discussions, while Sandra handled creative and strategic conversations. Their division of responsibilities seemed natural and efficient, maximizing their ability to connect with diverse groups of guests and advance multiple business objectives simultaneously. What you couldn't have observed, however, were the subtle signs that suggested a different interpretation of the evening's events and relationships. You wouldn't have noticed the careful way I observed every interaction, cataloging Sandra's responses to different types of people and situations. You couldn't have seen how I was systematically evaluating her character, her treatment of employees and vendors, and her attitudes toward people she perceived as having limited influence or authority. You wouldn't have recognized the significance of my brief conversations with specific guests, conversations that appeared to be polite social interactions, but were actually strategic communications with business partners, industry leaders, and professional contacts who knew me in capacities that no one at the party suspected or understood. If you had been watching more carefully, you might have noticed how certain guests showed me a level of respect and attention that seemed inconsistent with my supposed role as a retiring administrative assistant. You could have observed brief moments when influential executives sought my opinion on industry trends, asked for my assessment of market conditions, or requested my thoughts on strategic decisions that would typically be beyond the scope of secretarial responsibilities. You might have seen how I responded to these interactions with knowledge and insights that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of business strategy, competitive analysis, and market dynamics that seemed unusually comprehensive for someone whose career had supposedly been limited to administrative support and clerical functions. You couldn't have known that several of the evening's most important guests were actually my longtime business associates, strategic partners, and professional collaborators who were participating in an elaborate performance designed to test Sandra's character and reveal her true attitudes toward people she believed had no power to affect her success or challenge her authority. What you definitely couldn't have seen was the detailed documentation I had been maintaining for the past 3 years, carefully recording Sandra's behavior, decisions, and treatment of various people within the agency and the broader business community. This documentation included specific examples of how she interacted with employees at different hierarchical levels, her responses to ethical dilemmas, and her approach to managing relationships with people she perceived as useful versus those she viewed as irrelevant to her advancement. You wouldn't have realized that many of the conversations happening around you were providing me with valuable intelligence about Sandra's professional practices, her strategic thinking, and her fundamental values regarding respect, integrity, and responsibility in business relationships and family dynamics. You couldn't have imagined that the modest woman accepting retirement gifts and polite congratulations was actually conducting the most comprehensive character assessment of her life, gathering evidence that would soon be used to make decisions that would fundamentally alter Sandra's career trajectory and professional reputation in ways she couldn't possibly anticipate or prepare for. The retirement party was not what it appeared to be. It was not simply a celebration of my departure from administrative duties, or Sandra's ascension to creative leadership. It was the culminating event in a 3-year investigation designed to answer the most important question of my professional life. Did Sandra possess the character and values necessary to inherit control of the empire I had spent 5 decades building in secret? What you couldn't have seen, what you couldn't have imagined, and what was about to be revealed in the most shocking way possible was that every assumption they had made about my role at Morrison Associates, my financial stake in the company's success, and my influence over their professional futures was not just wrong. It was about to cost Sandra everything she thought she had earned through her talent, ambition, and strategic career planning. But before I reveal what that document contained, and the moment when Sandra's world completely collapsed, you need to understand how I had reached this point, why I had allowed everyone to believe I was simply a retiring secretary, and what I had been quietly observing about Sandra's character and professional values during the 3 years since she married my son and began her rapid ascent through what she believed was someone else's company. Because sometimes the most important questions aren't about whether longtime employees deserve recognition for their contributions. They're about whether the people we trust with leadership positions can treat others with respect when they believe those others have no power to affect their success, and what happens when someone with real authority decides to find out exactly who deserves to inherit the empire they spent 5 decades building in secret. It all began in September, 3 years before that devastating retirement party, when David called to tell me that he had met someone special and wanted to bring her to Sunday dinner to meet the family. What he didn't know was that this introduction would mark the beginning of the most comprehensive character assessment I had ever conducted, one that would determine not only Sandra's worthiness to join our family, but her qualifications to inherit control of the business empire I had spent 5 decades building, while maintaining the perfect disguise of a dedicated executive assistant. "Mom, her name is Sandra Chen, and she's incredible," David said over the phone, his voice filled with the enthusiasm of someone who had found what he believed was his perfect professional and personal partner. "She just started at Morrison Associates as a senior account executive, and she's already making such an impact. I think you're really going to like her." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I replied, immediately beginning to formulate the testing strategy that would reveal Sandra's true character over the coming months and years. "I'd love to meet her. Why don't you bring her for dinner this Sunday?" "The thing is, Mom, Sandra's really ambitious and focused on her career. She's been researching the agency and the industry, and she's got some really innovative ideas about how we could modernize our operations and expand our market reach. I was hoping you could share some insights about the company's history and culture." This was the perfect opening for the deception I was about to begin. "Oh, David, I'm not sure I'd have much to offer someone with her background and expertise. I've just been handling administrative duties for so long. But I'd be happy to answer any questions about office procedures and historical records." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and I could sense David's slight disappointment that his mother wouldn't be able to provide the kind of strategic business insights that might impress his new girlfriend and demonstrate our family's connection to the agency's success. "Well, Mom, I'm sure she'd appreciate any perspective you can provide. She's really interested in understanding how successful agencies maintain their client relationships and competitive positioning over time." Quote, "I'll do my best to be helpful, dear, though I'm sure someone with her professional background will have much more sophisticated insights than anything I could share." Over the following days, I carefully prepared for what would be the first phase of my character assessment. I researched Sandra's professional background, educational credentials, and career trajectory, gathering intelligence that would help me design tests that would reveal her true attitudes toward people she perceived as having limited power or influence over her success. Sandra Chen had graduated from Northwestern University with a degree in marketing communications, completed an MBA from University of Chicago, and spent 4 years at 2 respected Chicago advertising agencies before joining Morrison Associates. Her portfolio included successful campaigns for mid-size corporate clients, and her references suggested strong analytical skills, creative thinking, and professional dedication. On paper, Sandra appeared to be exactly the kind of talented professional who could contribute meaningfully to the agency's growth and development. But credentials and references couldn't reveal the character traits that would determine whether she deserved to inherit control of my life's work. When Sandra arrived for Sunday dinner that first evening, I had already established the persona I would maintain throughout our relationship. Eleanor Blackwood, the dedicated but unremarkable executive assistant who had spent 45 years supporting the real professionals at Morrison and Associates without ever achieving significant recognition or influence herself. "Mrs. Blackwood, it's such a pleasure to meet you," Sandra said warmly as David introduced us. "David has told me so much about your dedication to the agency. It must be wonderful to have been part of such a successful organization for so many years. Please call me Eleanor, dear, and thank you for the kind words. I've been very fortunate to work with such talented people over the years. David tells me you're bringing some exciting new ideas to the agency." "Well, I'm certainly enthusiastic about the opportunities I see for growth and modernization. The marketing industry has evolved so dramatically with digital platforms and data analytics. I think there's tremendous potential for agencies that can adapt to contemporary client needs and market conditions." Quote, I nodded appreciatively while carefully observing Sandra's communication style, her assumptions about my level of understanding, and her approach to discussing professional topics with someone she perceived as having limited business expertise. "That sounds fascinating, though I'm afraid much of the technical side of modern marketing is beyond my understanding. I've always focused on the administrative aspects, scheduling, correspondence, record keeping. The strategic thinking has always been handled by people with your kind of background and training." Sandra's response was polite and respectful, but I detected subtle signs of the patronizing attitude that would become more pronounced as our relationship developed and she became more comfortable expressing her true opinions about my capabilities and professional value. "Oh, I'm sure you understand more than you realize, Eleanor. Administrative professionals often have valuable insights into client relationships and operational efficiency that strategic people sometimes overlook. This response told me that Sandra viewed me as someone whose perspective might occasionally be useful for minor operational details, but who lacked the qualifications for meaningful participation in strategic business discussions. Her tone was diplomatically encouraging while actually being quite dismissive of my potential contributions to serious professional conversations. Over the following weeks, I began implementing the first phase of my character assessment by gradually inserting myself into Sandra and David's professional discussions with seemingly innocent questions and observations that would test her patience and reveal her true attitudes about sharing decision-making authority with people she considered unqualified. During family dinners, I would ask questions about their current projects and challenges, presenting myself as a curious older woman who wanted to understand their work better, while actually conducting sophisticated professional analysis of their strategies and methods. Sandra dear, I've been reading about some of the new digital advertising approaches in the business magazines. How do you decide which platforms are most effective for different types of clients? Sandra would respond with explanations that were technically accurate, but simplified for what she assumed was my limited understanding of marketing principles and contemporary business practices. Her explanations revealed that she viewed me as someone who needed basic concepts explained in elementary terms, rather than someone capable of engaging in detailed professional discussion. Well, Eleanor, it really depends on understanding your target audience demographics and their media consumption habits. For example, if we're trying to reach young professionals, we might focus on LinkedIn and Instagram, but for reaching older consumers, Facebook might be more effective. I would nod and ask follow-up questions that appeared to be amateur curiosity, but were actually professional assessments of her strategic thinking and technical knowledge. That makes sense. How do you measure whether the advertising is actually working? Is it just about how many people see it, or are there other factors to consider? These conversations allowed me to evaluate not only Sandra's professional competence, which was genuinely impressive, but more importantly, her attitude toward sharing knowledge and authority with people she perceived as intellectually inferior or professionally irrelevant. Sandra's responses consistently demonstrated a pattern of polite condescension that suggested she viewed educational interactions with me as charitable acts rather than professional exchanges between equals. She was patient and thorough in her explanations, but her tone and approach clearly indicated that she considered these conversations to be social courtesy, rather than meaningful business discussion. The second phase of my character assessment began when I started attending agency events and professional gatherings where Sandra would be present, presenting myself as David's supportive mother who was interested in learning more about the business environment where her son worked. At the agency's quarterly client appreciation event, I positioned myself as an observer, who was grateful for the opportunity to see the professional world where David and Sandra were building their careers, while actually conducting systematic evaluation of Sandra's behavior toward different types of people in various social and professional contexts. I watched Sandra interact with clients, colleagues, vendors, and service providers, paying particular attention to how her communication style and level of respect varied based on her assessment of each person's importance to her professional success and career advancement. With major clients and senior agency leadership, Sandra was engaging, knowledgeable, and professionally impressive. Her conversations demonstrated sophisticated understanding of market trends, strategic thinking, and creative problem-solving that justified the respect and attention she received from influential business leaders. With junior staff members, administrative personnel, and service providers, Sandra's behavior was courteous but noticeably different. She was efficient rather than engaging, task-focused rather than relationship-building, and clearly more interested in achieving specific objectives than in developing meaningful professional connections with people she viewed as having limited influence over her career prospects. Most revealing was Sandra's interaction with the agency's longtime receptionist, Maria Santos, who had been with the company for 15 years and possessed extensive knowledge of client relationships, industry contacts, and operational procedures that could be valuable for someone trying to understand the agency's culture and competitive advantages. Instead of recognizing Maria as a potential source of institutional knowledge and professional insight, Sandra treated her as a clerical resource, whose primary value was scheduling meetings and managing correspondence. Their interactions were polite but dismissive, with Sandra showing no interest in Maria's perspective on client relationships or industry developments. This pattern of behavior told me that Sandra evaluated people primarily based on their apparent authority and influence, rather than their potential knowledge, experience, or contributions to organizational success. She was respectful to people who could advance her career and efficiently polite to everyone else. The third phase of my character assessment involved creating situations where Sandra would need to choose between personal convenience and professional courtesy, between individual advancement and collaborative success, and between short-term gains and long-term relationship building. I began volunteering to help with agency projects and events, presenting myself as someone who had time and enthusiasm to contribute, while actually testing Sandra's willingness to work with someone she considered professionally beneath her standards and expectations. Sandra dear, I know you're organizing the client conference next month. Is there anything I could help with? I have experience with event planning and vendor coordination from my administrative work. Sandra's response was diplomatically accepting, while clearly indicating that she viewed my involvement as more of a social accommodation than a valuable professional contribution. That's very thoughtful of you, Eleanor. There are certainly some logistical details that could use attention. Maybe you could help with registration coordination and basic administrative tasks? This response revealed that Sandra was willing to accept my help as long as my contributions were limited to areas she considered appropriate for my skill level and professional qualifications. She had no interest in exploring whether my administrative experience might actually include strategic event planning, vendor negotiation, or professional relationship management capabilities. Over the following weeks, I demonstrated competence and insights that consistently exceeded Sandra's expectations, while carefully observing her reactions to evidence that challenged her assumptions about my capabilities and potential value as a collaborative partner. When I provided detailed analysis of venue options that included considerations of accessibility, acoustics, catering capabilities, and parking logistics that Sandra hadn't considered, she was surprised but attributed my thoroughness to excessive research rather than professional experience. Eleanor, this is really comprehensive analysis. You've obviously spent a lot of time researching these options. Well, dear, when you've been involved in organizing events for as long as I have, you learn what details can make the difference between success and problems. When I negotiated better pricing and service terms with vendors than Sandra had initially secured, she was impressed but assumed I had simply been persistent as a consumer rather than skilled as a professional negotiator. How did you manage to get them to reduce their pricing and include additional services? Oh, I just explained our needs clearly and asked if there were ways to optimize the value for both parties. Sometimes vendors are more flexible than their initial proposals suggest. Quote, when I identified potential speakers and entertainment options that aligned perfectly with the conference theme and audience interests, Sandra was grateful but didn't recognize that my suggestions reflected sophisticated understanding of audience psychology and professional event strategy. These are excellent suggestions, Eleanor. How did you find speakers who are such a good fit for our objectives? I've been following industry publications and professional associations for years. You learn to recognize who has valuable insights and presentation skills. Each of these interactions provided Sandra with evidence that my capabilities exceeded her initial assumptions, but rather than reconsidering her fundamental assessment of my professional qualifications and potential contributions, she consistently rationalized my competence as the result of enthusiasm and research, rather than expertise and experience. This pattern of explanation revealed a character trait that would become crucial to my final assessment. Sandra was more comfortable maintaining her preconceptions about people's limitations than acknowledging evidence that challenged her assumptions about professional hierarchy and qualification standards. The fourth phase of my character assessment focused on Sandra's behavior toward me when she believed she had authority and I was dependent on her approval or support for project success and recognition. I created situations where Sandra would need to decide how much credit to share for successful outcomes, how much responsibility to accept for problems or challenges, and how much respect to show for contributions from someone she considered professionally subordinate. During the client conference planning process, I identified and resolved several potential problems that could have created significant difficulties for attendee satisfaction and professional reputation. These solutions required industry knowledge, vendor relationship management, and strategic problem-solving that demonstrated professional competence beyond administrative support levels. When unexpected venue scheduling conflicts arose, I utilized professional contacts and negotiation skills to secure alternative arrangements that actually improved the conference logistics and cost structure. When catering service quality proved inadequate during the setup phase, I coordinated with backup providers and managed service recovery that prevented attendee dissatisfaction and maintained the agency's professional reputation. When technology systems failed during the opening session, I implemented contingency plans and coordinated technical support that minimized disruption and demonstrated professional event management capabilities. Sandra's responses to these contributions revealed her true character when dealing with people she perceived as helpers rather than partners. She was appreciative of the results, but consistently attributed success to her overall leadership and strategic planning, rather than acknowledging the specific expertise and problem-solving that had prevented potential disasters. In her post-conference communications with clients and agency leadership, Sandra emphasized her strategic vision and management coordination, while describing my contributions as valuable administrative support and helpful logistical assistance. This pattern of recognition told me that Sandra was comfortable accepting benefits from others' expertise while maintaining public narratives that supported her professional advancement and reputation for independent competence. More concerning was Sandra's behavior when minor problems did occur despite our collaborative problem-solving efforts. When some attendees complained about parking availability and registration delays, Sandra was quick to attribute these issues to without acknowledging that these problems had been minimized through contingency planning and professional event management. The fifth phase of my character assessment involved testing Sandra's integrity and professional ethics when she believed she was dealing with someone who couldn't challenge her decisions or expose her behavior to people who mattered for her career advancement. I created situations where Sandra would need to choose between accuracy and convenience, between transparency and self-promotion, and between collaborative honesty and individual advantage. During client proposal development, I provided research and analysis that significantly improved the strategic foundation and competitive positioning of campaign recommendations. My contributions included market analysis, competitive intelligence, and strategic insights that enhanced the proposal's persuasiveness and professional credibility. When presenting these proposals to clients, Sandra incorporated my research and strategic insights while describing them as results of her team's analysis and her strategic leadership, rather than acknowledging the specific contributions that had strengthened the competitive positioning and market understanding. When clients praised the thoroughness and sophistication of the market analysis, Sandra accepted the recognition without correcting their assumption that she had personally conducted the research and developed the strategic insights. This behavior revealed that Sandra was willing to misrepresent others' contributions when doing so advanced her professional reputation and client relationships without risk of exposure or accountability. The sixth phase of my character assessment focused on Sandra's treatment of people who challenged her assumptions or questioned her decisions, particularly when those challenges came from individuals she considered professionally inferior or personally irrelevant to her success. I began offering alternative perspectives on strategic decisions and pointing out potential risks or oversights in campaign planning, presenting these insights as concerns from someone who wanted to support the agency's success rather than criticism from someone who questioned Sandra's professional judgment. Sandra's responses to constructive feedback and alternative viewpoints revealed her fundamental attitude toward collaboration and intellectual humility when dealing with people she considered less qualified than herself. When I suggested that certain campaign approaches might not resonate with older demographic segments based on consumer behavior research I had supposedly encountered in business publications, Sandra's response was politely dismissive. That's an interesting perspective, Eleanor, but our target audience research indicates that the demographic segments we're focusing on respond positively to these messaging strategies. When I pointed out potential budget allocation issues that could affect campaign sustainability and return on investment, Sandra attributed my concerns to misunderstanding of contemporary marketing economics and client budget management. I understand your concern about cost efficiency, Eleanor. But marketing budget allocation involves strategic considerations that require understanding of client objectives and competitive market dynamics. When I identified potential legal and regulatory compliance issues that could affect campaign approval and implementation, Sandra dismissed my observations as excessive caution from someone who wasn't familiar with industry standards and regulatory environments. Thanks for raising that concern, Eleanor, but we have legal review processes that address regulatory compliance issues. These campaigns have been developed according to industry best practices. These interactions revealed that Sandra was fundamentally unwilling to seriously consider insights or corrections from people she viewed as professionally unqualified, regardless of the accuracy or value of their observations and suggestions. By the end of Sandra's first year at Morrison Associates, I had gathered extensive evidence about her character, professional ethics, and attitudes toward people she perceived as having limited authority or influence over her success. Sandra was professionally competent, strategically intelligent, and capable of impressive results when working with clients and colleagues she respected. She was also consistently dismissive of people she considered inferior, willing to misrepresent others' contributions for personal advantage, and resistant to feedback or collaboration with individuals she viewed as professionally subordinate. Most importantly, Sandra had demonstrated a pattern of behavior that suggested she would be respectful and collaborative with people who could advance her career, while being efficiently dismissive of everyone else, including family members she perceived as dependent on her success rather than capable of affecting her professional future. The character assessment I had conducted during Sandra's first year provided clear evidence that she possessed the professional skills necessary for marketing success, but lacked the integrity and respect for others that would make her worthy of inheriting control of my life's work. But I needed more time and more comprehensive testing to be completely certain of my conclusions. Sandra's behavior during controlled situations and limited interactions might not accurately reflect her character under pressure or her treatment of people when she believed she had permanent authority over their circumstances and welfare. The stage was now set for 2 more years of systematic character evaluation that would reveal Sandra's true nature when she believed she was dealing with someone who was completely dependent on her tolerance and generosity, rather than someone who was secretly documenting every interaction as evidence for the most important decision of my professional life. To truly understand the devastating impact of what would happen when Sandra discovered the truth about my actual position at Morrison Associates, you need to see the world exactly as she and David saw it during those 3 years leading up to my retirement party. You need to understand how reasonable their assumptions seemed, how logical their concerns appeared, and how completely convinced they were that they were dealing with an aging executive assistant whose understanding of modern business practices had become outdated, and whose involvement in strategic decisions was becoming increasingly problematic for the agency's growth and professional reputation. From Sandra's perspective, she was watching her mother-in-law experience what appeared to be a classic case of a longtime employee who had become so comfortable in her administrative role that she had developed unrealistic ideas about her importance to the company's success and her qualifications to participate in high-level business discussions and strategic planning sessions. Everything Sandra observed during her first year at Morrison & Associates seemed to confirm the research she had done about workplace dynamics involving longtime administrative staff who had difficulty adapting to organizational changes and accepting the natural evolution of their roles as companies modernized their operations and management structures. When Sandra looked at me offering unsolicited opinions about client relationship strategies during team meetings, she didn't see a business owner with decades of industry experience. She saw an administrative assistant whose proximity to executive decisions had given her the mistaken impression that she understood strategic thinking and client management at the same level as professionally trained marketing specialists and business development experts. When she watched me examine campaign proposals with what appeared to be detailed analysis and professional critique, she didn't see someone with comprehensive knowledge of marketing effectiveness and industry best practices. She saw workplace boundary confusion that occurred when longtime support staff began to view themselves as creative professionals rather than understanding their appropriate role in the collaborative process. The sophisticated questions I asked about target audience analysis, brand positioning strategies, and competitive market research weren't the inquiries of someone who had been developing marketing campaigns for 50 years. They were concerning displays of professional overreach that suggested I had lost the ability to recognize appropriate boundaries between administrative support functions and creative strategy development responsibilities. My apparent inability to accept that contemporary marketing required specialized education, digital expertise, and current industry knowledge wasn't evidence of legitimate professional experience. It was demonstration of the kind of workplace entitlement that could develop when longtime employees confused familiarity with the business environment with actual professional qualifications and strategic competence. From Sandra's perspective, my detailed commentary about client needs, market trends, and campaign effectiveness wasn't valuable professional insight. It was inappropriate interference from someone whose understanding of marketing had become outdated and whose assessment of contemporary business practices was based on administrative observation rather than professional training and strategic responsibility. When I offered specific suggestions about improving client satisfaction, enhancing service delivery, and expanding market reach, Sandra saw well-intentioned but misguided advice from someone who didn't understand the complexity of modern marketing operations and the specialized expertise required for effective campaign development and client relationship management. Sandra's academic background in marketing communications, combined with her professional experience at 2 previous agencies, had provided her with comprehensive knowledge of industry standards, best practices, and competitive requirements that made my suggestions seem amateur and potentially counterproductive for the agency's professional reputation and client satisfaction. My extensive comments about budget allocation, resource management, and operational efficiency weren't evidence of business management expertise. They were examples of administrative curiosity extending beyond appropriate boundaries and reflecting an aging employee's difficulty accepting that her role didn't include strategic decision-making responsibilities or operational oversight authority. When Sandra observed me at industry conferences and professional networking events, engaging marketing executives and potential clients in detailed conversations about campaign strategy and market analysis, she saw inappropriate professional representation that could confuse potential clients about the agency's actual leadership structure and strategic capabilities. She interpreted my technical questions and industry insights as potentially embarrassing displays of administrative staff attempting to participate in professional discussions beyond their qualifications, creating awkward situations that required tactful management to maintain the agency's credibility and professional relationships. My corrections of other professionals' assumptions about market conditions, consumer behavior trends, and industry best practices weren't demonstrations of expertise. They were examples of workplace social confusion that occurred when support staff developed unrealistic assessments of their professional standing and industry knowledge. From Sandra's perspective, my detailed knowledge of advertising regulations, campaign compliance requirements, and industry ethical standards wasn't evidence of professional involvement in marketing operations. It was information that administrative assistants naturally acquired through exposure to business documentation and regulatory correspondence, without understanding the strategic context and professional application of such knowledge. When I offered unsolicited feedback about vendor relationships, contractor performance, and service provider quality, Sandra didn't see strategic consultation from someone with extensive business management experience. She saw inappropriate involvement in procurement and vendor management decisions that exceeded administrative responsibilities, and reflected poor understanding of professional boundaries and decision-making authority. My ability to identify potential problems with campaign timelines, budget projections, and resource allocation wasn't professional insight. It was the kind of detail-oriented observation that administrative personnel sometimes developed as a hobby or professional interest, without understanding the strategic considerations and market factors that influenced actual business decisions. The modifications and improvements I suggested for campaign concepts, creative strategies, and client presentations weren't valuable professional consultation. They were amateur critiques based on personal preferences, rather than understanding of target audience psychology, brand positioning requirements, and market research data that informed professional creative development. When I expressed concerns about the agency's competitive positioning, service differentiation, and market expansion strategies, Sandra didn't hear legitimate business analysis. She heard outdated thinking that reflected an administrative employee's misunderstanding of contemporary marketing industry conditions and competitive requirements. My extensive research into competitor activities, industry trend analysis, and market opportunity assessment wasn't professional market intelligence. It was excessive information-gathering behavior that some longtime employees developed when they had too much time and insufficient understanding of their appropriate role in strategic planning and business development processes. The technology recommendations I provided for campaign management systems, client relationship databases, and creative collaboration platforms weren't professional-grade solutions for serious productivity enhancement. They were suggestions based on consumer-level technology exposure that didn't reflect understanding of enterprise software requirements integration capabilities, and professional workflow optimization needs. When I demonstrated advanced knowledge of marketing analytics platforms, data visualization tools, and campaign performance measurement systems, Sandra assumed I was repeating information I had gathered from professional development seminars and industry publications, rather than drawing on decades of hands-on experience implementing similar systems for major client campaigns and business development initiatives. My detailed critiques of the agency's client acquisition strategies, account management procedures, and business development approaches weren't informed strategic analysis. They were uninformed opinions that longtime administrative staff sometimes developed when they had excessive exposure to business discussions without understanding the professional considerations, market factors, and competitive requirements that shaped strategic decision-making. The networking suggestions I provided about industry contacts and professional relationship building weren't evidence of extensive business connections. They were examples of administrative personnel trying to feel relevant and important by claiming associations with people and organizations that may have been casual contacts from decades of managing executive correspondence rather than genuine professional relationships with current business value. When I discussed market research methodologies and consumer behavior analysis with apparent expertise, Sandra heard the kind of superficial knowledge that administrative staff sometimes acquired through exposure to marketing documentation and campaign materials, mistaking familiarity with professional terminology for actual understanding of research design, data analysis, and strategic application of market intelligence. My suggestions for improving the agency's operational efficiency, workflow optimization, and resource management weren't valuable business consultation. They were inappropriate interference from someone who didn't understand the difference between observing business operations and having the qualifications to recommend strategic improvements in complex professional environments with multiple stakeholder requirements and competitive pressures. The detailed questions I asked about campaign budgeting, cost allocation, and financial performance measurement weren't professional financial analysis. They were intrusive curiosity that reflected poor understanding of appropriate boundaries between administrative responsibilities and strategic financial management that required specialized expertise and executive authority. When I demonstrated knowledge of industry pricing standards, competitive rate structures, and value proposition development, Sandra assumed I had become obsessive about business research as a way to feel more involved in professional activities that were actually beyond my qualifications, an appropriate role in the agency's organizational structure. My ability to predict campaign success and failure patterns wasn't evidence of professional marketing expertise. It was the kind of pattern recognition that some administrative personnel developed when they had extensive exposure to campaign development processes without understanding the strategic factors, market conditions, and professional methodologies that actually determined marketing effectiveness and client satisfaction. The detailed performance analyses I provided for various campaigns and client relationships weren't professional marketing assessment. They were amateur evaluations based on limited perspective that reflected an administrative observer's viewpoint rather than understanding of the complex factors that influenced campaign success, client retention, and competitive positioning in professional marketing environments. When I offered to facilitate introductions between the agency and potential clients or strategic partners, Sandra assumed I was exaggerating casual social acquaintanceships into more significant business relationships, the way longtime employees sometimes inflated their professional connections to feel more important and relevant than their actual circumstances and industry standing would suggest to people who understood contemporary business networking and professional relationship development. My detailed knowledge of client industries, market conditions, and business challenges wasn't evidence of comprehensive client relationship management. It was information that administrative personnel naturally acquired through exposure to client correspondence and business documentation without understanding the strategic context and professional application that informed actual account management and business development activities. The specific advice I gave about campaign targeting, message development, and creative strategy wasn't professional marketing consultation. It was amateur opinion based on consumer perspective and personal preferences, rather than understanding of audience psychology, brand strategy, and market research data that informed professional creative development and campaign optimization. When I discussed employee management techniques, team development strategies, and organizational culture optimization with apparent authority, Sandra heard the kind of workplace observation that administrative personnel sometimes developed through years of office experience without understanding the professional considerations, legal requirements, and strategic human resource management principles that informed actual personnel decisions and organizational development initiatives. My critiques of the agency's talent acquisition strategies, professional development programs, and employee retention approaches weren't professional human resource analysis. They were opinions based on administrative observation that reflected limited understanding of contemporary workforce management, competitive compensation structures, and professional development requirements in creative industries with specialized skill requirements. The detailed information I shared about industry compensation standards, benefit packages, and professional development opportunities wasn't evidence of human resource expertise. It was extensive research I had conducted through professional publications and industry reports, creating an appearance of specialized knowledge that was actually based on consumer-level information rather than professional experience in talent management and organizational development. When I demonstrated knowledge of legal compliance requirements, contract negotiation principles, and intellectual property protection strategies, Sandra assumed I had developed an administrative employee's hobby-level interest in legal and regulatory matters, possibly as a way to feel more intellectually engaged with professional activities that were actually beyond my appropriate role and qualifications in the agency's business operations. My ability to identify potential legal risks in client contracts, vendor agreements, and creative work ownership wasn't evidence of business legal expertise. It was the kind of detailed consumer advocacy that some longtime employees developed when they became analytical about business documentation and legal language without understanding the strategic legal considerations and professional risk management that informed actual business decision-making. The contract recommendations and legal strategy suggestions I provided weren't professional business counsel. They were amateur analysis based on consumer-level legal information and personal research that didn't reflect understanding of commercial law, industry regulations, and strategic legal planning that required professional expertise and specialized knowledge of marketing industry legal requirements. All of these observations led Sandra to a conclusion that seemed completely logical and well supported by evidence. I was a longtime administrative employee whose professional boundaries had become confused through decades of proximity to executive decision-making, whose understanding of contemporary business practices was outdated and potentially counterproductive, and whose attempts to participate in strategic discussions were well-intentioned but inappropriate for someone without relevant professional qualifications and current industry expertise. From her perspective, the kindest interpretation was that I was experiencing the kind of workplace identity confusion that could develop when longtime support staff became disconnected from appropriate role boundaries and developed unrealistic assessments of their professional qualifications and strategic value to the organization. The most concerning interpretation was that I was developing age-related changes in judgment and social awareness that were manifesting through inappropriate workplace behavior, poor professional boundaries, and an inability to distinguish between administrative experience and executive qualifications, requiring careful management to protect both my dignity and the agency's professional relationships from the consequences of my inappropriate involvement in strategic business activities. Either way, Sandra believed she was dealing with a longtime family employee whose workplace behavior had become potentially problematic for the agency's professional reputation and business development, requiring diplomatic management and possibly professional intervention to address what appeared to be serious boundary problems that were affecting client relationships and staff dynamics. And that complete conviction, that absolute certainty that she understood my situation and was making appropriate assessments about my professional capabilities and appropriate role in the agency's future, was exactly what made the revelation that was coming so perfectly devastating when it finally arrived. Because Sandra had spent 3 years demonstrating exactly how she treated longtime employees when she believed they had become liabilities rather than assets, burdens rather than resources, and problems to be managed rather than people to be respected and valued for their potential contributions to organizational success and strategic development. The stage was now set for a systematic character assessment that would reveal Sandra's true attitudes about respect, professional courtesy, and the treatment of people she believed were dependent on her generosity and professional success, rather than capable of determining her future in ways she couldn't possibly imagine or prepare for. By Sandra's second year at Morrison Associates, I had carefully established my cover as a well-meaning but professionally limited executive assistant, whose attempts to contribute often exceeded what Sandra considered appropriate boundaries. But now it was time to begin escalating the contradictions that would eventually challenge every assumption she had made about my capabilities, my background, and my true position within the agency's power structure. The first major anomaly occurred during the agency's pitch for the prestigious Chicago Tourism Board account in March. This was a $15 million contract that would establish Morrison Associates as a major player in municipal marketing and destination branding. Exactly the kind of high-profile client that could transform Sandra's career trajectory and professional reputation within the industry. Sandra had been leading the proposal development team for 3 months, coordinating market research, creative strategy, and competitive analysis that would determine whether the agency could compete successfully against much larger firms from New York and Los Angeles, who were also vying for this transformative contract. "Eleanor, would you mind helping us with some of the logistical coordination for the final presentation?" Sandra asked during one of our family dinners. "We need someone to manage travel arrangements, venue coordination, and administrative details, so the creative team can focus on strategy and content development." "Of course, dear. I'd be happy to help with whatever you need. This sounds like such an important opportunity for the agency." It really is. Landing the tourism board account would establish us as a serious competitor in the municipal marketing sector. The presentation has to be absolutely perfect, professional, innovative, and strategically sophisticated. The following week, I began what appeared to be administrative support for the presentation logistics, while actually conducting a comprehensive strategic analysis of Chicago's tourism market, competitive positioning opportunities, and municipal branding challenges that would soon make Sandra and her team very uncomfortable with their assumptions about my understanding of high-level marketing strategy. During my first meeting with the presentation planning team, I began demonstrating knowledge that seemed inconsistent with my supposed background and experience level. "Sandra, I've been reviewing the venue options for the presentation, and I'm wondering if we've considered the psychological impact of the meeting environment on the client's decision-making process," I said while distributing detailed analysis of each potential location's advantages and drawbacks. The team members looked surprised by my use of professional terminology and strategic thinking that seemed advanced for someone they viewed as providing administrative coordination. "What do you mean by psychological impact, Eleanor?" asked James Mitchell, the agency's senior creative director. "Well, the tourism board members will be evaluating our understanding of visitor experience and destination appeal. If we present in a sterile conference room, we're missing an opportunity to demonstrate our appreciation for environmental psychology and experiential marketing principles." Sandra was staring at me with obvious confusion about how I had acquired knowledge of experiential marketing and environmental psychology concepts that were central to contemporary destination branding strategies. "Eleanor, where did you learn about experiential marketing and environmental psychology?" she asked carefully. "Oh, I've been reading about tourism industry trends and visitor behavior research. When you're helping with such an important presentation, you want to understand the context and strategic considerations." I reached into my briefcase and withdrew what appeared to be amateur research notes but were actually professionally comprehensive analysis of Chicago's tourism competitive landscape, visitor demographic trends, and municipal branding opportunities that demonstrated expertise far beyond casual reading and general interest. I've also been analyzing Chicago's current tourism positioning relative to comparable destinations, and I think there might be some strategic opportunities that haven't been fully explored in our current approach. The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Sandra and her team were clearly struggling to process how their administrative coordinator had developed sophisticated understanding of destination marketing strategy and competitive analysis methodology. "Eleanor," Sandra said slowly, "this level of analysis suggests professional experience in tourism, marketing, or destination branding. Are you sure you don't have background we haven't discussed?" Quote, "I maintained my innocent expression while providing information that demonstrated expertise they couldn't possibly explain based on their assumptions about my professional history and current circumstances. Sandra, I've never worked in tourism marketing. I just think it's important to understand the industry context when you're supporting such significant strategic initiatives. I want to make sure my administrative contributions align with the professional objectives." But I wasn't finished. Over the next hour, I continued demonstrating knowledge that completely contradicted their assumptions about my qualifications and experience level. One thing I noticed in my research is that Chicago's current tourism messaging focuses heavily on architectural heritage and cultural attractions, but there's limited emphasis on the experiential storytelling and emotional connection strategies that have been successful for cities like Portland and Nashville. James was now looking at me with obvious bewilderment. Eleanor, experiential storytelling and emotional connection strategies are advanced concepts in destination branding. How do you know about Portland and Nashville's tourism strategies? Well, I've been studying successful destination marketing campaigns to understand best practices and innovative approaches. Portland's Keep Portland Weird campaign and Nashville's music heritage positioning demonstrate how authentic cultural identity can differentiate destinations in crowded tourism markets. Sandra was clearly struggling to reconcile my sophisticated industry knowledge with her understanding of my background and professional qualifications. But Eleanor, that level of competitive analysis and strategic understanding suggests professional involvement in destination marketing or municipal branding. That's not information you typically encounter through casual research. I smiled dismissively while providing even more detailed insights that demonstrated comprehensive understanding of tourism industry dynamics and strategic marketing principles. Sandra, I think you might be overestimating how specialized this information really is. With the internet and professional publications, motivated people can learn about almost any industry if they're interested and have time to research thoroughly. Quote, "The second major anomaly occurred the following week, when Sandra encountered significant challenges developing the creative strategy for the tourism board presentation. The creative team had developed several campaign concepts, but they were struggling to identify a unique positioning approach that would differentiate Chicago from other major metropolitan destinations, competing for the same visitor demographics and tourism revenue. Eleanor, I hate to impose, but would you mind reviewing our creative concepts and providing feedback from a consumer perspective?" Sandra asked during our regular project coordination meeting. Sometimes, fresh eyes can identify opportunities or concerns that professional teams might overlook. "I'd be happy to take a look, dear. I might not understand the technical aspects of campaign development, but I can certainly share thoughts from an outside perspective." Sandra provided me with detailed creative briefs, campaign concepts, and strategic positioning statements that represented 3 months of professional development work by some of Chicago's most talented marketing professionals. 2 days later, I returned with what appeared to be amateur observations but were actually comprehensive strategic analysis and creative recommendations that would fundamentally reshape their approach to the tourism board presentation. Sandra, I've reviewed the creative concepts, and I think they're professionally executed and strategically sound. However, I'm wondering if we might be missing an opportunity to address a fundamental challenge in Chicago's tourism positioning. "What kind of challenge are you thinking about?" Sandra asked, clearly expecting general consumer feedback rather than strategic marketing analysis. Well, all 3 concepts focus on Chicago's established strengths: architecture, food, culture, and entertainment. But they don't address the perception challenge that Chicago faces regarding safety, weather, and accessibility compared to destinations like Miami, San Diego, or Seattle. The creative team was now staring at me with obvious surprise at my understanding of destination marketing challenges and competitive positioning strategy. "Eleanor," said Maria Rodriguez, the agency's strategic planning director, "perception management and competitive differentiation are core challenges in destination marketing. How did you identify these specific positioning issues?" Quote, "I maintained my persona of helpful amateur while providing insights that demonstrated professional-level strategic thinking and market analysis capabilities." "Maria, I suppose I've been thinking about Chicago from a visitor's perspective and comparing it to other cities I've read about in travel publications and tourism industry reports. It seems like we need to acknowledge visitor concerns while emphasizing unique advantages." I opened my notebook and began presenting what appeared to be casual observations but were actually sophisticated strategic recommendations based on decades of marketing experience and industry expertise. For example, instead of avoiding the weather issue, we could position Chicago as a year-round destination with distinct seasonal experiences: summer festivals and lakefront activities, autumn cultural seasons, winter holiday traditions, and spring renewal and outdoor recreation. Each season becomes a unique value proposition rather than a limitation. James was now looking at me with obvious confusion about how I had developed comprehensive understanding of seasonal tourism positioning and experiential marketing strategy. Eleanor, seasonal positioning and experiential differentiation are advanced concepts in destination marketing. Where did you learn about these strategic approaches? I've been reading about successful tourism campaigns and visitor behavior research. Cities like Montreal and Boston have used seasonal positioning effectively to create year-round appeal and overcome weather perception challenges. Sandra was clearly struggling to process the sophistication of my strategic thinking and industry knowledge. But Eleanor, this isn't casual tourism research. This is professional-level strategic analysis that demonstrates understanding of destination marketing principles and competitive positioning methodology. I continued providing recommendations that revealed comprehensive expertise in tourism marketing while maintaining my innocent amateur persona. For the safety perception issue, rather than defensive messaging, we could emphasize Chicago's neighborhood diversity and authentic urban experiences. Position it as a real city with genuine character, rather than a sanitized tourist destination. Visitors increasingly want authentic experiences rather than artificial tourist environments. Quote, Maria was now staring at me with obvious bewilderment about my understanding of contemporary tourism, consumer psychology, and authentic experience marketing. Eleanor, authentic experience marketing and neighborhood-based positioning are sophisticated strategies that require understanding of consumer psychology and urban tourism dynamics. How do you know about these approaches? Well, I've been reading about tourism trends and visitor behavior research. Travelers today want experiences that feel genuine and locally connected, rather than generic tourist activities. The third major anomaly occurred when Sandra encountered serious budget and timeline challenges that threatened the agency's ability to deliver the comprehensive presentation required for the tourism board competition. The creative development process had taken longer than anticipated, market research costs had exceeded initial projections, and presentation production requirements were more expensive than budgeted. Sandra was facing the possibility of either compromising the presentation quality or exceeding the budget allocation that could affect the agency's profitability, even if they won the contract. Eleanor, I know this isn't really your area of expertise, but do you have any thoughts about how we might address these budget and timeline constraints without compromising the presentation quality? Sandra asked during an emergency project meeting. Well, dear, I might have some suggestions based on my experience with project coordination and vendor management over the years. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew detailed analysis of the project budget, timeline optimization recommendations, and vendor negotiation strategies that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of professional project management and business operations. Sandra, I've been reviewing the budget allocations and timeline requirements, and I think there might be opportunities for cost optimization and efficiency improvements that wouldn't affect presentation quality. The project team was now looking at me with obvious surprise at my apparent understanding of budget analysis and project management methodology. What kind of optimization opportunities are you thinking about? Asked David, who was clearly confused about how his mother had developed detailed knowledge of professional project management and cost control strategies. Well, for example, we're paying premium rates for market research data that might be available through municipal sources and tourism industry associations at significantly reduced costs. Chicago's Convention and Visitors Bureau and the Illinois Tourism Board maintain extensive visitor research databases that are accessible to qualified marketing partners. Sandra was staring at me with growing bewilderment about my knowledge of tourism industry resources and municipal data accessibility. Eleanor, how do you know about Convention and Visitors Bureau research databases and municipal tourism data sources? I've been researching tourism industry resources and professional associations. When you're coordinating a project of this importance, you want to identify all available resources and cost-saving opportunities. I continued providing recommendations that demonstrated comprehensive understanding of tourism industry operations and professional resource management. For creative production costs, we might consider partnerships with local cultural organizations and tourism attractions that would benefit from association with our campaign concepts. Many organizations are willing to provide venue access, photography permissions, and promotional cooperation in exchange for professional visibility and marketing exposure. James was now looking at me with obvious confusion about my understanding of partnership marketing and cooperative promotional strategies. Eleanor, partnership marketing and cooperative promotional arrangements require understanding of mutual benefit structures and professional relationship management. Where did you learn about these collaborative approaches? James, I suppose I've been thinking about how different organizations might benefit from working together on tourism promotion. It seems like many businesses and institutions would want to support initiatives that increase visitor traffic and economic activity. The fourth major anomaly occurred when Sandra needed to present preliminary concepts to Morrison Associates senior leadership for approval before proceeding with the final tourism board presentation development. This internal presentation would determine whether the agency would commit full resources to the competitive pitch or modify their approach based on executive feedback and strategic guidance from the senior partners who ultimately controlled business development decisions and client relationship management. Eleanor, would you mind attending the leadership presentation to take notes and coordinate follow-up actions? Sandra asked. I want to make sure we capture all feedback and address any concerns before finalizing our approach. Of course, dear. I'd be happy to help document the discussion and coordinate any additional research or development work. The leadership presentation meeting included Sandra, David, the creative team, and 3 senior partners who had built Morrison Associates into one of Chicago's most respected marketing agencies over the past 25 years. During Sandra's presentation of the campaign concepts and strategic positioning recommendations, I observed carefully how the senior partners responded to different elements of the proposal and where they identified potential concerns or improvement opportunities. When Sandra concluded her presentation and asked for feedback, the senior partners raised several strategic questions and competitive concerns that revealed gaps in the market analysis and positioning strategy that could affect the agency's competitiveness against larger firms with more extensive resources and industry experience. Sandra, the creative concepts are impressive and strategically sound, said Robert Chen, the agency's managing partner. However, I'm concerned about our competitive positioning against firms like McCann World Group and Ogilvy, who have extensive experience with municipal tourism contracts and established relationships with major destination marketing organizations. We also need to address budget and resource questions, added Patricia Williams, the agency's operations partner. This level of campaign development and implementation would require significant investment in talent acquisition, technology systems, and operational capacity that could strain our current infrastructure. Sandra was clearly struggling to address these concerns, with the depth and specificity that the senior partners required for approval of such a significant business development initiative. I understand your concerns about competitive positioning and resource requirements, Sandra replied. Our creative approach and local market knowledge should differentiate us from larger firms that might not understand Chicago's unique character and tourism opportunities. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The opportunity to demonstrate knowledge and strategic thinking that would completely contradict everyone's assumptions about my professional capabilities and industry expertise. Excuse me, I said quietly, but if I might offer a perspective on the competitive positioning and resource management concerns. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at the executive assistant, who had just volunteered to provide strategic business analysis during a senior leadership meeting about one of the agency's most important business development opportunities. Robert Chen looked surprised but nodded politely. Of course, Eleanor, we'd appreciate your perspective. I opened my notebook and began presenting what appeared to be administrative observations, but were actually comprehensive strategic analysis based on decades of business development experience and industry expertise. Robert, I think the competitive positioning challenge can actually become our advantage if we approach it strategically. The larger firms have extensive resources, but they also have bureaucratic limitations and standardized approaches that might not align with Chicago's authentic character and unique positioning opportunities. The senior partners were now staring at me with obvious bewilderment about my understanding of competitive differentiation strategy and business development positioning. Eleanor, Patricia said carefully, competitive differentiation and positioning strategy are sophisticated business concepts. Where did you develop this understanding of strategic business development? I maintained my innocent persona while providing insights that demonstrated comprehensive knowledge of business strategy and competitive analysis methodology. Patricia, I've been observing business strategy discussions for many years, and I've done extensive research about tourism marketing and destination branding to support this project. I just want to contribute whatever insights might be helpful. I continued presenting analysis that revealed professional-level expertise in business development and strategic planning. For the resource management concerns, we might consider phased implementation approaches that allow us to demonstrate success and generate revenue before making major infrastructure investments. Many successful agencies have grown strategically by proving their capabilities with pilot projects before expanding operational capacity. Robert was now looking at me with obvious confusion about my knowledge of phased business development and strategic growth management. Eleanor, phased implementation and strategic growth management require understanding of business finance and operational development. This isn't information you typically encounter through administrative experience. Robert, I suppose I've learned about business development strategies through years of observing agency operations and reading about successful business growth models. I want to make sure our family's business succeeds in this competitive environment. The fifth major anomaly occurred during the final preparation phase for the tourism board presentation, when Sandra encountered unexpected challenges that threatened to compromise the presentation quality and professional impact. 3 days before the scheduled presentation, Sandra discovered that several key components of the campaign proposal contained inaccuracies and strategic weaknesses that could damage the agency's credibility and competitive positioning. The market research data contained demographic assumptions that didn't align with current visitor behavior trends. The creative concepts included cultural references that might not resonate with Chicago's diverse tourist demographics, and the budget projections included cost estimates that were unrealistic for municipal marketing campaigns of this scope and complexity. Eleanor, I hate to ask this, but do you think you could help us review and verify some of the presentation components? Sandra asked during an emergency project meeting. We need to make sure everything is accurate and professionally credible before we present to the tourism board. Of course, dear. I'd be happy to help with whatever verification and fact-checking you need. Over the next 48 hours, I conducted comprehensive analysis and correction of the presentation materials that demonstrated expertise and attention to detail that completely exceeded Sandra's expectations and challenged her fundamental assumptions about my professional capabilities. I identified and corrected statistical errors in the demographic analysis, refined the cultural positioning strategies to ensure authentic representation of Chicago's diversity, and revised the budget projections to reflect realistic costs for municipal marketing campaigns based on industry standards and competitive benchmarking. When I presented the corrected analysis to Sandra and the team, their reaction was profound confusion and growing suspicion about my apparent expertise and professional knowledge. Eleanor, this level of analysis and correction requires professional experience in market research, cultural marketing, and municipal campaign budgeting, Sandra said, staring at the revised presentation materials. Where did you acquire this expertise? Sandra, I just want to make sure our presentation is accurate and professional. I've been very thorough in researching industry standards and best practices to support the team's excellent work. But the corrections I had made were too sophisticated and accurate to be explained by amateur research and general interest. Sandra was now facing evidence that fundamentally challenged her understanding of my background and professional qualifications. But Eleanor, these corrections demonstrate understanding of statistical methodology, cultural marketing principles, and municipal budgeting processes that require professional training and experience. This isn't something you learn through casual research. I maintained my innocent expression while the evidence of my expertise created cognitive dissonance that Sandra would struggle to resolve without questioning her fundamental assumptions about my professional history and current capabilities. The sixth major anomaly occurred on the day of the tourism board presentation, when unexpected technical failures and logistical challenges threatened to undermine months of preparation and professional development work. The presentation venue's audiovisual systems malfunctioned, several key presentation materials were damaged during transportation, and 2 team members became ill and couldn't participate in the final presentation delivery. Sandra was facing potential disaster that could damage not only the agency's chance of winning the tourism board contract, but also her professional reputation and career advancement prospects within the agency and the broader marketing industry. Eleanor, I don't know what we're going to do, Sandra said, clearly panicking about the multiple crises that were threatening the presentation's success. We can't present professionally without proper audiovisual support, and we don't have backup plans for these technical and personnel problems. This was exactly the kind of crisis situation that would reveal character and professional competence under extreme pressure, and provide me with the opportunity to demonstrate capabilities that would completely shatter Sandra's assumptions about my professional background and strategic value. Sandra, don't worry, I think we can resolve these challenges and still deliver an impressive presentation. Over the next 3 hours, I coordinated technical support, arranged backup presentation materials, and reorganized the presentation delivery approach in ways that demonstrated professional event management and crisis resolution capabilities that no amateur could possibly possess. I utilized professional contacts to secure alternative audiovisual equipment, implemented contingency plans that I had prepared weeks earlier, and coordinated presentation logistics that transformed potential disaster into demonstration of professional competence and strategic preparation. When the tourism board presentation proceeded smoothly despite the multiple crises, Sandra was forced to confront evidence that I possessed professional capabilities and industry connections that couldn't be explained by administrative experience and casual research. Eleanor, how did you manage to resolve all those problems so quickly and effectively? Sandra asked after the successful presentation delivery. Well, dear, when you've been coordinating events and managing logistics for as long as I have, you learn to prepare for contingencies and develop resources for problem solving. But Sandra was no longer satisfied with my casual explanations. She had witnessed professional-level crisis management and strategic problem solving that demonstrated expertise and capabilities that contradicted everything she believed about my background and qualifications. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Sandra was now questioning whether her assumptions about my professional limitations might be incomplete or inaccurate, but she wasn't yet ready to consider the possibility that her fundamental understanding of my role at Morrison Associates and my influence over her professional future might be completely wrong. The stage was now set for the escalating confrontations that would reveal Sandra's true character when she believed she was dealing with someone who threatened her authority and challenged her assumptions about professional hierarchy and family dynamics. Because the most important test wasn't whether Sandra could recognize my hidden expertise, it was whether she could treat me with respect and dignity when she felt her position and authority were being questioned by someone she had dismissed as professionally irrelevant and personally powerless. By the time Morrison and Associates successfully won the Chicago Tourism Board contract, largely due to the strategic insights and crisis management I had provided, while maintaining my cover as a helpful administrative assistant, Sandra was facing a level of cognitive dissonance that should have forced her to reconsider her fundamental assumptions about my background and capabilities. Instead, she chose a path that would reveal the depths of her character flaws and set the stage for the devastating revelation that was coming. Rather than questioning whether her elderly mother-in-law might possess legitimate professional expertise that had been hidden or underestimated, Sandra decided that my increasingly sophisticated contributions represented a concerning escalation of inappropriate boundary crossing that required immediate intervention and careful management to protect both my dignity and the agency's professional reputation. Her private conversations with David, which I overheard through careful positioning during family gatherings and agency events, revealed a daughter-in-law who had chosen control over curiosity, dismissal over investigation, and social convenience over genuine understanding of the evidence that was challenging her preconceptions. David, your mother's behavior during the tourism board project was really concerning, Sandra said during one of their evening discussions after we had celebrated the contract victory with the entire agency team. She wasn't just offering administrative support, she was acting like she had professional expertise and industry connections that we should be taking seriously. I noticed that too, David replied, his voice filled with the confusion of someone who couldn't reconcile contradictory evidence with established assumptions about his mother's background and capabilities. The strategic analysis she provided was actually incredibly sophisticated, and her crisis management during the presentation was impressively professional. But that makes it even more puzzling. Where could she have acquired that level of knowledge and those kinds of industry contacts? David, I think we need to consider the possibility that your mother is developing age-related changes in self-perception that are manifesting as delusions of professional competence and exaggerated claims about her qualifications and industry connections. Quote, "This conversation revealed everything I needed to know about Sandra's fundamental approach to processing information that challenged her worldview. Rather than investigating whether her assumptions might be wrong, She had concluded that I was experiencing mental health issues that required family intervention and professional management. Maybe we should talk to her doctor about this, David suggested, clearly influenced by Sandra's interpretation of my behavior. There might be cognitive assessment tools or therapeutic approaches that could help her develop more realistic self-awareness and appropriate professional boundaries. Or maybe we need to set firmer limits about her involvement in agency projects and business development, Sandra replied. If she's developing unrealistic ideas about her expertise and qualifications, enabling those fantasies isn't helping anyone, and it could create professional embarrassment for the agency if clients or industry contacts start questioning our judgment about personnel and strategic capabilities. These discussions told me that Sandra and David had made a fundamental decision about how to handle family members whose behavior challenged their comfort zones. They would pathologize, manage, and control rather than investigate, understand, and respect the possibility that their assumptions might be incomplete or inaccurate. Sandra's right, David concluded. We need to be more careful about Mom's involvement in professional activities. She's obviously intelligent and well-intentioned, but she doesn't seem to understand appropriate boundaries for someone in her position. Over the following months, I watched Sandra implement a systematic campaign to limit my involvement in agency activities while publicly maintaining the appearance of respectful inclusion and family consideration. Her approach was diplomatically executed, but fundamentally controlling, designed to manage what she perceived as my problematic behavior while protecting her authority and professional reputation. When I offered insights about upcoming client proposals, Sandra would thank me politely, while clearly indicating that strategic decisions required professional expertise and contemporary industry knowledge that exceeded my background and qualifications. Eleanor, I appreciate your interest in our client development process, but campaign strategy involves specialized methodologies and current market research that require professional training and certification. We want to make sure our recommendations are based on industry best practices and competitive analysis. When I suggested improvements to operational procedures or administrative systems, Sandra would acknowledge my suggestions while emphasizing that organizational development required understanding of modern business practices and regulatory compliance that had evolved significantly since my early career experience. That's an interesting perspective, Eleanor, but contemporary business operations involve legal compliance requirements and technology integration challenges that require specialized knowledge and current professional experience. When I volunteered to help coordinate agency events or client presentations, Sandra would accept my assistance while carefully limiting my responsibilities to tasks she considered appropriate for my supposed skill level and professional background. We'd certainly welcome your help with logistical coordination and basic administrative tasks, Eleanor, but the strategic planning and client relationship management aspects need to be handled by team members with relevant professional qualifications and industry experience. This pattern of response revealed Sandra's systematic approach to managing my involvement while maintaining social courtesy and family harmony. She was polite and appreciative of my enthusiasm while consistently reinforcing boundaries that reflected her assumptions about my limitations and appropriate role in professional activities. The first major test of Sandra's rationalization strategy occurred when I provided comprehensive market analysis for a potential retail client that demonstrated knowledge of consumer behavior trends, competitive positioning strategies, and industry performance metrics that clearly exceeded what any amateur researcher could reasonably possess. Morrison Associates had been approached by a regional department store chain that was struggling with declining sales and needed strategic guidance about modernizing their marketing approach to compete with online retailers and changing consumer preferences. The potential contract represented significant revenue and the opportunity to expand the agency's retail sector expertise. Sandra had assigned a research team to analyze the client's competitive environment and develop strategic recommendations. But their initial analysis contained several gaps and inaccuracies that could affect the quality of the agency's proposal and competitive positioning. Eleanor, I know this isn't really your area of expertise, but would you mind reviewing our retail market analysis to see if there are any obvious oversights or consumer perspective issues we should consider? Sandra asked during a project planning meeting. Of course, dear. I'd be happy to take a look and share any thoughts that might be helpful. I spent the following week conducting comprehensive analysis of retail industry trends, consumer behavior research, and competitive intelligence that demonstrated professional-level expertise in market research methodology and strategic business analysis. When I presented my findings to Sandra and the research team, their reaction revealed the extent to which they were committed to maintaining their assumptions about my limitations, rather than acknowledging evidence of professional competence. Sandra, I've reviewed the market analysis and I think the research team has done excellent work identifying the major competitive challenges and consumer trend factors, I began, distributing detailed analysis that contained insights and recommendations far beyond amateur capability. However, I noticed some areas where additional research might strengthen the strategic foundation and improve our competitive positioning with this client. The research team was looking at my documentation with obvious confusion about the sophistication and accuracy of my analysis and recommendations. "Eleanor, this is really comprehensive market research," said Jennifer Park, the agency's senior research analyst. "Where did you find this level of detailed information about retail industry performance metrics and consumer behavior trends?" I maintained my innocent expression while providing information that demonstrated professional expertise in market research and business intelligence. "Jennifer, I've been researching retail industry publications and consumer behavior studies to understand the client's challenges better. I wanted to make sure I could provide useful perspective on their competitive environment." Quote. But the analysis I had provided included proprietary market intelligence, statistical methodology, and strategic insights that no casual researcher could possibly access or interpret without professional training and industry experience. "But Eleanor," Sandra said carefully, examining my documentation more closely, "this analysis includes market share data, consumer sentiment metrics, and competitive intelligence that typically requires professional research services and industry database access. How did you obtain this information?" "Well, dear, there are many professional resources available online if you know where to look and how to interpret the data. I've always been thorough in my research when supporting important projects." Sandra's response revealed her commitment to rationalizing rather than investigating the evidence that contradicted her assumptions about my background and capabilities. "Eleanor, I think you've been exceptionally thorough in your research, but we need to be careful about using information from sources that might not meet professional research standards. Our recommendations need to be based on verified data and methodologically sound analysis." This dismissal of my research, despite its accuracy and professional quality, demonstrated Sandra's fundamental unwillingness to acknowledge that I might possess legitimate expertise that challenged her understanding of professional hierarchy and family dynamics. The second major test occurred when I identified and resolved a significant legal compliance issue that could have created serious problems for the agency's relationship with several major clients, and potentially resulted in regulatory violations and financial penalties. During my review of current client contracts and campaign materials, I discovered that several advertising campaigns contained claims and promotional strategies that violated federal truth in advertising regulations and state consumer protection laws. These violations were subtle but potentially serious, requiring immediate correction to avoid regulatory investigation and client liability issues. The compliance problems had been overlooked by the agency's legal review process, and addressing them required detailed knowledge of advertising law, regulatory compliance procedures, and industry standards that clearly exceeded amateur capability. "Sandra, I hate to raise concerns about current client campaigns, but I think there might be some regulatory compliance issues that should be addressed," I said during a routine project coordination meeting. "What kind of compliance issues are you thinking about, Eleanor?" Sandra asked, clearly expecting general consumer concerns rather than specific legal analysis. "Well, I've been reviewing some of our recent campaign materials, and I noticed claims and promotional strategies that might not align with FTC Truth in Advertising guidelines and state consumer protection regulations." The legal and account management teams were now staring at me with obvious bewilderment about my knowledge of federal advertising regulations and state consumer protection law. "Eleanor, how do you know about FTC guidelines and consumer protection regulations?" asked Michael Torres, the agency's account management director. "Michael, I've been reading about advertising law and regulatory compliance to better understand the legal environment where our clients operate. I want to make sure my administrative support doesn't create any problems for client relationships or agency reputation." I opened my briefcase and withdrew detailed analysis of the compliance issues, including specific regulatory citations, legal precedents, and correction recommendations that demonstrated professional-level understanding of advertising law and regulatory compliance procedures. For example, the Henderson Electronics campaign includes performance claims that aren't supported by independent testing data, which could violate Section 5 of the FTC Act regarding deceptive advertising practices. The room fell silent as everyone processed the sophistication of my legal analysis and regulatory knowledge. "Eleanor," said Lisa Chen, the agency's legal counsel, "Section 5 FTC Act violations and advertising substantiation requirements are specialized areas of commercial law. Where did you learn about these regulatory frameworks?" "Lisa, I've been researching advertising law and consumer protection regulations to understand the legal considerations that affect our client relationships and campaign development." But Sandra was committed to her rationalization strategy rather than acknowledging the professional expertise I was demonstrating. "Eleanor, while we appreciate your concern about regulatory compliance, legal analysis requires specialized training and professional certification. We have established legal review processes that address these issues with qualified legal counsel." "But Sandra," Lisa interrupted, "Eleanor's analysis is actually quite accurate. These campaigns do present potential compliance risks that our routine legal review didn't identify. How did you recognize these specific regulatory issues?" Sandra's response revealed her determination to maintain her assumptions about my limitations despite evidence from the agency's own legal counsel that my analysis was professionally accurate and valuable. "Lisa, I'm sure Eleanor has been very thorough in her research, but we need to be careful about making legal assessments based on amateur interpretation of regulatory materials. Professional legal analysis requires understanding of case law, regulatory precedent, and industry-specific compliance standards." The third major test occurred when Sandra faced a crisis in client relationship management that threatened to damage the agency's reputation and result in the loss of several major. By the time Morrison and Associates successfully won the Chicago Tourism Board contract, largely due to the strategic insights and crisis management I had provided, while maintaining my cover as a helpful administrative assistant, Sandra was facing a level of cognitive dissonance that should have forced her to reconsider her fundamental assumptions about my background and capabilities. Instead, she chose a path that would reveal the depths of her character flaws and set the stage for the devastating revelation that was coming. Rather than questioning whether her elderly mother-in-law might possess legitimate professional expertise that had been hidden or underestimated, Sandra decided that my increasingly sophisticated contributions represented a concerning escalation of inappropriate boundary crossing that required immediate intervention and careful management to protect both my dignity and the agency's professional reputation. Her private conversations with David, which I overheard through careful positioning during family gatherings and agency events, revealed a daughter-in-law who had chosen control over curiosity, dismissal over investigation, and social convenience over genuine understanding of the evidence that was challenging her preconceptions. "David, your mother's behavior during the tourism board project was really concerning," Sandra said during one of their evening discussions after we had celebrated the contract victory with the entire agency team. "She wasn't just offering administrative support, she was acting like she had professional expertise and industry connections that we should be taking seriously." "I noticed that too," David replied, his voice filled with the confusion of someone who couldn't reconcile contradictory evidence with established assumptions about his mother's background and capabilities. The strategic analysis she provided was actually incredibly sophisticated, and her crisis management during the presentation was impressively professional. But that makes it even more puzzling. Where could she have acquired that level of knowledge and those kinds of industry contacts? "David, I think we need to consider the possibility that your mother is developing age-related changes in self-perception that are manifesting as delusions of professional competence and exaggerated claims about her qualifications and industry connections." Quote, "This conversation revealed everything I needed to know about Sandra's fundamental approach to processing information that challenged her worldview. Rather than investigating whether her assumptions might be wrong, she had concluded that I was experiencing mental health issues that required family intervention and professional management." "Maybe we should talk to her doctor about this," David suggested, clearly influenced by Sandra's interpretation of my behavior. "There might be cognitive assessment tools or therapeutic approaches that could help her develop more realistic self-awareness and appropriate professional boundaries." Or maybe we need to set firmer limits about her involvement in agency projects and business development, Sandra replied. If she's developing unrealistic ideas about her expertise and qualifications, enabling those fantasies isn't helping anyone, and it could create professional embarrassment for the agency if clients or industry contacts start questioning our judgment about personnel and strategic capabilities. These discussions told me that Sandra and David had made a fundamental decision about how to handle family members whose behavior challenged their comfort zones. They would pathologize, manage, and control rather than investigate, understand, and respect the possibility that their assumptions might be incomplete or inaccurate. Sandra's right, David concluded. We need to be more careful about Mom's involvement in professional activities. She's obviously intelligent and well-intentioned, but she doesn't seem to understand appropriate boundaries for someone in her position. Over the following months, I watched Sandra implement a systematic campaign to limit my involvement in agency activities while publicly maintaining the appearance of respectful inclusion and family consideration. Her approach was diplomatically executed, but fundamentally controlling, designed to manage what she perceived as my problematic behavior while protecting her authority and professional reputation. When I offered insights about upcoming client proposals, Sandra would thank me politely, while clearly indicating that strategic decisions required professional expertise and contemporary industry knowledge that exceeded my background and qualifications. Eleanor, I appreciate your interest in our client development process, but campaign strategy involves specialized methodologies and current market research that require professional training and certification. We want to make sure our recommendations are based on industry best practices and competitive analysis. When I suggested improvements to operational procedures or administrative systems, Sandra would acknowledge my suggestions while emphasizing that organizational development required understanding of modern business practices and regulatory compliance that had evolved significantly since my early career experience. That's an interesting perspective, Eleanor, but contemporary business operations involve legal compliance requirements and technology integration challenges that require specialized knowledge and current professional experience. When I volunteered to help coordinate agency events or client presentations, Sandra would accept my assistance while carefully limiting my responsibilities to tasks she considered appropriate for my supposed skill level and professional background. We'd certainly welcome your help with logistical coordination and basic administrative tasks, Eleanor, but the strategic planning and client relationship management aspects need to be handled by team members with relevant professional qualifications and industry experience. This pattern of response revealed Sandra's systematic approach to managing my involvement while maintaining social courtesy and family harmony. She was polite and appreciative of my enthusiasm while consistently reinforcing boundaries that reflected her assumptions about my limitations and appropriate role in professional activities. The first major test of Sandra's rationalization strategy occurred when I provided comprehensive market analysis for a potential retail client that demonstrated knowledge of consumer behavior trends, competitive positioning strategies, and industry performance metrics that clearly exceeded what any amateur researcher could reasonably possess. Morrison Associates had been approached by a regional department store chain that was struggling with declining sales and needed strategic guidance about modernizing their marketing approach to compete with online retailers and changing consumer preferences. The potential contract represented significant revenue and the opportunity to expand the agency's retail sector expertise. Sandra had assigned a research team to analyze the client's competitive environment and develop strategic recommendations. But their initial analysis contained several gaps and inaccuracies that could affect the quality of the agency's proposal and competitive positioning. Eleanor, I know this isn't really your area of expertise, but would you mind reviewing our retail market analysis to see if there are any obvious oversights or consumer perspective issues we should consider? Sandra asked during a project planning meeting. Of course, dear. I'd be happy to take a look and share any thoughts that might be helpful. I spent the following week conducting comprehensive analysis of retail industry trends, consumer behavior research, and competitive intelligence that demonstrated professional-level expertise in market research methodology and strategic business analysis. When I presented my findings to Sandra and the research team, their reaction revealed the extent to which they were committed to maintaining their assumptions about my limitations, rather than acknowledging evidence of professional competence. Sandra, I've reviewed the market analysis and I think the research team has done excellent work identifying the major competitive challenges and consumer trend factors, I began, distributing detailed analysis that contained insights and recommendations far beyond amateur capability. However, I noticed some areas where additional research might strengthen the strategic foundation and improve our competitive positioning with this client. The research team was looking at my documentation with obvious confusion about the sophistication and accuracy of my analysis and recommendations. Eleanor, this is really comprehensive market research, said Jennifer Park, the agency's senior research analyst. Where did you find this level of detailed information about retail industry performance metrics and consumer behavior trends? I maintained my innocent expression while providing information that demonstrated professional expertise in market research and business intelligence. Jennifer, I've been researching retail industry publications and consumer behavior studies to understand the client's challenges better. I wanted to make sure I could provide useful perspective on their competitive environment. Quote, but the analysis I had provided included proprietary market intelligence, statistical methodology, and strategic insights that no casual researcher could possibly access or interpret without professional training and industry experience. But Eleanor, Sandra said carefully, examining my documentation more closely, this analysis includes market share data, consumer sentiment metrics, and competitive intelligence that typically requires professional research services and industry database access. How did you obtain this information? Well, dear, there are many professional resources available online if you know where to look and how to interpret the data. I've always been thorough in my research when supporting important projects. Sandra's response revealed her commitment to rationalizing rather than investigating the evidence that contradicted her assumptions about my background and capabilities. Eleanor, I think you've been exceptionally thorough in your research, but we need to be careful about using information from sources that might not meet professional research standards. Our recommendations need to be based on verified data and methodologically sound analysis. This dismissal of my research, despite its accuracy and professional quality, demonstrated Sandra's fundamental unwillingness to acknowledge that I might possess legitimate expertise that challenged her understanding of professional hierarchy and family dynamics. The second major test occurred when I identified and resolved a significant legal compliance issue that could have created serious problems for the agency's relationship with several major clients, and potentially resulted in regulatory violations and financial penalties. During my review of current client contracts and campaign materials, I discovered that several advertising campaigns contained claims and promotional strategies that violated federal truth in advertising regulations and state consumer protection laws. These violations were subtle but potentially serious, requiring immediate correction to avoid regulatory investigation and client liability issues. The compliance problems had been overlooked by the agency's legal review process, and addressing them required detailed knowledge of advertising law, regulatory compliance procedures, and industry standards that clearly exceeded amateur capability. Sandra, I hate to raise concerns about current client campaigns, but I think there might be some regulatory compliance issues that should be addressed, I said during a routine project coordination meeting. What kind of compliance issues are you thinking about, Eleanor? Sandra asked, clearly expecting general consumer concerns rather than specific legal analysis. Well, I've been reviewing some of our recent campaign materials, and I noticed claims and promotional strategies that might not. By the summer leading up to my retirement party, Sandra's systematic campaign to limit my involvement and undermine my contributions had reached a critical point where she felt confident that she had successfully managed what she perceived as my boundary issues and established clear professional hierarchies that would protect her authority and the agency's reputation from my inappropriate interference. But what Sandra didn't realize was that every dismissive comment, every rationalized explanation, and every attempt to minimize my contributions had been carefully documented as evidence of her true character, evidence that would soon be used to make the most important decision of my professional life. The time had come for the final test that would push Sandra beyond all reasonable limits and force her to reveal exactly who she was when she believed she had ultimate power over someone who couldn't defend herself or challenge her authority. The escalation I had been building toward for 3 years was now ready to unfold at the very event that was supposed to celebrate my departure from relevance and Sandra's ascension to undisputed control over what she believed was David's family business. On the morning of my retirement party, I spent several hours preparing not just for the celebration, but for the performance that would reveal Sandra's character under ultimate pressure and provide undeniable justification for the consequences that would change all of our lives forever. I had spent weeks orchestrating the guest list, venue arrangements, and social dynamics that would create the perfect environment for Sandra to demonstrate her true attitudes about respect, family loyalty, and the treatment of people she perceived as powerless obstacles to her professional ambitions. The guest list included not only Morrison and Associates staff and their families, but also prominent business leaders, potential clients, and industry professionals who represented Sandra's future networking opportunities and career advancement prospects. This audience would provide the social pressure and professional incentives that would push Sandra toward revealing her authentic character. The venue, the Grand Ballroom of the Riverside Country Club, had been chosen specifically because its elegant atmosphere and prestigious reputation would encourage Sandra to view the evening as a showcase for her professional accomplishments and leadership capabilities, rather than a genuine celebration of my contributions to the agency's success. Most importantly, I had arranged for several key individuals to attend who knew the truth about my professional background and business accomplishments, but had agreed to maintain the deception until the moment when Sandra's character would be fully revealed and the consequences could be implemented. As guests arrived for the cocktail reception, I positioned myself as the gracious retiree who was grateful for the recognition and excited about Sandra's leadership of the agency's future. My behavior was designed to encourage Sandra to feel secure in her authority and comfortable expressing her true attitudes about my worth and appropriate role in the family's professional legacy. "Good evening, everyone," I said warmly as I greeted arriving guests. "Thank you so much for coming to celebrate this transition. I'm so proud of Sandra and David and excited about the innovative leadership they'll bring to Morrison Associates." Sandra was networking confidently among the business leaders and potential clients, discussing her strategic vision for the agency and her plans for expanding market reach and service capabilities. Her conversations demonstrated the professional competence and strategic thinking that had earned her recognition within Chicago's marketing industry. But I was observing more than Sandra's professional capabilities. I was watching how she interacted with different types of people, how she responded to questions about my contributions to the agency's success, and how she positioned herself relative to my supposed legacy and influence. When prominent business leaders asked Sandra about my role in the agency's development and strategic planning, her responses revealed her fundamental attitudes about my professional value and historical contributions. "Eleanor has been wonderfully dedicated to the agency for many years," Sandra would say diplomatically. "She's provided valuable administrative support and institutional knowledge that has helped maintain continuity and operational efficiency." Quote, "These responses were polite and respectful on the surface, but they consistently minimized my contributions to routine administrative functions while positioning Sandra as the source of strategic thinking and professional leadership that would determine the agency's future success." When potential clients inquired about my insights into Chicago's business community and market dynamics, Sandra's responses revealed her unwillingness to acknowledge that I might possess valuable professional knowledge or industry relationships. "Eleanor certainly has extensive experience with the agency's operations and client relationships," Sandra would respond. "But our strategic planning and market analysis are based on contemporary research and professional methodologies that reflect current industry standards and competitive requirements." During the cocktail hour, I began implementing the first phase of my final character test by demonstrating knowledge and capabilities that would challenge Sandra's comfort zone and force her to choose between acknowledging my expertise or revealing her controlling behavior in front of the assembled business leaders and industry professionals. When a group of prominent executives began discussing Chicago's economic development trends and business climate challenges, I joined the conversation with insights and analysis that clearly exceeded what anyone would expect from a retiring administrative assistant. The municipal infrastructure investments and tax incentive programs have created interesting opportunities for business expansion and workforce development, I observed. But I think the real competitive advantages will come from understanding how these economic factors affect consumer behavior and market dynamics in specific industry sectors. The executives were impressed by my sophisticated understanding of economic development and business strategy, But Sandra was clearly uncomfortable with my participation in professional discussions that exceeded her assumptions about my qualifications and appropriate social boundaries. Eleanor has always been interested in business and economic trends, Sandra interjected diplomatically. She's done extensive reading about Chicago's development and has valuable perspective from her years of observing the business community. Quote, "This response was designed to acknowledge my contributions, while subtly indicating that my insights were based on amateur research rather than professional expertise, protecting Sandra's authority while explaining away evidence that challenged the social hierarchies she wanted to maintain." When another group of business leaders began discussing marketing industry trends and competitive challenges, I provided analysis and insights that demonstrated comprehensive understanding of strategic marketing and business development that clearly contradicted Sandra's assumptions about my professional background. The integration of data analytics and experiential marketing is creating opportunities for agencies that can combine quantitative analysis with creative storytelling, I noted. But the real competitive advantage will come from understanding how these capabilities serve different client objectives and market positioning strategies. Sandra's discomfort was becoming more visible as I continued to demonstrate expertise that exceeded her explanations and challenged her control over professional narratives and social dynamics. Mom has certainly learned about marketing trends through her involvement with the agency, David said supportively. She's always been curious about the strategic aspects of our work. But Sandra's response revealed her growing frustration with my apparent inability to understand appropriate boundaries and social expectations. Eleanor, while your interest in marketing strategy is admirable, these discussions involve specialized professional knowledge and industry experience that might be confusing for people without formal training and current market exposure. This comment was Sandra's first direct attempt to publicly limit my participation in professional conversations and establish clear boundaries about my qualifications and appropriate role in business discussions. As the evening progressed to the formal dinner and presentation portion, I escalated my character testing by offering specific insights and recommendations about the agency's strategic direction and competitive positioning that would force Sandra to choose between acknowledging my expertise or revealing her dismissive attitudes toward people she considered professionally subordinate. During the dinner conversation at our table, which included several major clients and potential business partners, I began discussing specific opportunities and challenges that Morrison and Associates would face in the evolving marketing landscape. The agency has tremendous potential for growth in the municipal marketing and destination branding sectors, I observed. But success will require understanding how public sector client requirements differ from corporate marketing objectives and developing specialized capabilities for stakeholder management and community engagement. The clients and business partners were impressed by my sophisticated understanding of public sector marketing and strategic business development, but Sandra was clearly struggling to maintain her authority and professional credibility while managing my apparent overreach into areas she considered beyond my qualifications. Eleanor has certainly observed many different types of client relationships during her years with the agency, Sandra responded carefully. But strategic planning for municipal marketing requires specialized expertise in public sector procurement, regulatory compliance, and stakeholder management that goes beyond general business experience. I continued providing insights that demonstrated comprehensive understanding of business strategy and industry dynamics that challenged Sandra's explanations and forced her to choose between acknowledging my expertise or revealing her controlling behavior in front of important professional contacts. The key competitive advantage will be understanding how municipal clients evaluate vendor qualifications and proposal requirements, I continued. Success requires demonstrating not just creative capabilities but also operational capacity, regulatory knowledge, and long-term relationship management that addresses the unique challenges of public sector marketing. Sandra was now visibly frustrated with my continued participation in strategic discussions that exceeded her comfort zone and challenged her control over professional narratives and business relationship management. Eleanor, while your observations about client relationships are interesting, strategic business development involves professional analysis and industry expertise that requires formal training and current market experience. Quote, "During the formal presentation portion of the evening, I implemented the most aggressive phase of my character testing by offering specific recommendations and corrections that would push Sandra beyond her ability to maintain diplomatic responses and force her to reveal her true character under extreme pressure. When Sandra began her presentation about the agency's future strategic direction and growth opportunities, I began asking detailed questions and offering alternative perspectives that demonstrated expertise she couldn't explain or dismiss through her usual rationalization strategies. Sandra, that's an excellent analysis of our competitive positioning in the corporate marketing sector, I said during her presentation. But I'm wondering if we should also consider the integration challenges and resource requirements for expanding into municipal marketing while maintaining service quality and client satisfaction in our existing business lines. The audience was impressed by the sophistication of my strategic thinking and business analysis. But Sandra was clearly struggling to maintain her composure and professional authority while addressing questions that exceeded her expectations and challenged her prepared presentation. That's a thoughtful consideration, Eleanor, Sandra replied with obvious strain. But strategic planning involves comprehensive analysis of market opportunities, competitive capabilities, and resource allocation that requires professional business expertise and current industry knowledge. I continued asking questions and offering insights that revealed comprehensive understanding of business strategy and operational management that Sandra couldn't dismiss or rationalize without revealing her fundamental disrespect for my intelligence and professional capabilities. I'm also curious about how we'll address the talent acquisition and technology investment requirements for municipal marketing without compromising our competitive advantages in corporate clients, I continued. The service delivery models and operational capabilities are quite different, and success requires understanding both the strategic opportunities and implementation challenges. Sandra's response revealed the depth of her frustration and the beginning of her loss of professional composure under pressure from someone she considered unqualified to participate in strategic business discussions. Eleanor, while your interest in our strategic planning is appreciated, business development involves complex analysis and professional decision-making that requires specialized training and industry expertise that goes beyond administrative experience and general business interest. The moment I had been preparing for 3 years finally arrived when Sandra's frustration and need to control the situation pushed her beyond all reasonable boundaries of respect and family courtesy. As the formal presentation concluded and guests began networking during the final reception period, I approached Sandra with what appeared to be a simple question, but was actually the final test that would reveal her character when confronted with direct challenge to her authority and professional control. Sandra, dear, I hope my questions during the presentation were helpful for clarifying the strategic considerations and implementation challenges. I just want to make sure I understand the direction you're planning for the agency's future. Sandra's response revealed the accumulated frustration and controlling behavior that she had been suppressing throughout the evening, as my contributions and insights had consistently exceeded her expectations and challenged her assumptions about appropriate boundaries and professional hierarchy. Eleanor, I think we need to have a frank conversation about appropriate boundaries and realistic self-assessment, Sandra said, her voice carrying an edge that revealed her true feelings about my involvement in professional discussions and strategic planning. I'm not sure what you mean, dear. I was just trying to be supportive and contribute whatever insights might be helpful. Eleanor, throughout this entire evening, you've been inserting yourself into professional conversations and strategic discussions that frankly exceed your qualifications and background. You're not a marketing professional, you're not a business strategist, and you're not qualified to provide input on complex business development decisions. The conversation was attracting attention from nearby guests who were surprised by Sandra's increasingly direct and disrespectful tone toward her elderly mother-in-law at her own retirement celebration. Sandra, I was just asking questions and sharing observations based on my experience with the agency. I didn't mean to overstep any boundaries. But that's exactly the problem, Eleanor. You don't seem to understand what your boundaries should be. You're a retiring administrative assistant, not a business consultant. You need to understand your place in this organization and in this family. The words hung in the air as the nearby guests fell silent, clearly uncomfortable with Sandra's public disrespect and condescending treatment of her mother-in-law during what was supposed to be a celebration of my service and contributions. But Sandra wasn't finished. The pressure of maintaining her professional image while managing what she perceived as my inappropriate behavior had pushed her beyond all reasonable limits of respect and family courtesy. In her desperation to reassert control and establish clear hierarchies in front of the assembled business leaders and industry professionals, Sandra made the statement that would trigger the most devastating consequence of her entire life. "Eleanor, I think it's time for you to understand something," Sandra said, her voice rising with frustration and condescension. "This is my agency now. These are my clients and my strategic decisions. You've had your time, and now it's time for the real professionals to take over." The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable, as guests witnessed Sandra's complete lack of respect for her elderly mother-in-law during what was supposed to be a gracious celebration of transition and family continuity. But Sandra wasn't finished revealing her character. In her fury at being challenged by someone she considered powerless and irrelevant, she committed the ultimate act of disrespect that would justify everything that was about to happen. Standing up at the head table in front of 200 guests, Sandra raised her champagne glass and delivered the toast that would destroy her professional reputation and personal relationships forever. "Here's to Eleanor finally stepping aside so the real professionals can take over." The room fell into stunned silence as guests processed the shocking disrespect and professional cruelty of Sandra's public humiliation of her elderly mother-in-law during her own retirement celebration. But I remained calm and composed, because this moment of character revelation was exactly what I had been orchestrating for 3 years. Sandra had finally revealed her true nature when she believed she had ultimate power over someone who couldn't defend herself or challenge her authority. I stood up slowly, reached into my purse, and withdrew the business card that would begin the process of destroying every assumption Sandra had made about power, authority, and family dynamics at Morrison Associates. "Sandra," I said quietly, "before you make any final decisions about who the real professionals are, I'd like you to look at something." I placed my business card on the table in front of her exactly as I had planned from the moment I began this elaborate test of her character 3 years earlier. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. Sandra stared at the business card for what felt like several minutes, her eyes moving from the company logo to my name to the title that read, Eleanor Marie Blackwood, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Morrison Associates Marketing Agency. "Eleanor," she whispered finally, "what is this?" "This is my business card, Sandra. My actual business card, showing my position as the founder and majority owner of Morrison Associates, the agency you thought you were inheriting through marriage to David." David leaned forward to examine the card, his face showing complete bewilderment as he tried to process what he was seeing. "Mom, this says you're the founder and CEO of Morrison Associates. That can't be right. Morrison Associates was founded by, oh my God." "Actually, David, Morrison Associates was founded 47 years ago when I established a small marketing consultancy with $5,000 in savings and a determination to build something significant in Chicago's business community." I reached into my briefcase and began withdrawing additional documents, corporate founding documents, ownership certificates, financial statements, and business development records that documented nearly 5 decades of building one of Chicago's most successful marketing agencies. The administrative assistant who seemed to offer outdated advice was actually the founder and majority owner of the agency that employs 127 people across 3 office locations and has generated $347 million in revenue over the past decade. Sandra was reading through the corporate documents with increasing devastation as she realized that the powerless old woman she had been dismissing and controlling was actually the ultimate authority over every aspect of her professional life and career prospects. "This is impossible," Sandra said, her voice barely audible. "You told us you were just an administrative assistant. You said you had worked in support roles for decades." "Sandra, I have never told anyone that I was just an administrative assistant. I have never claimed to work in support roles or suggested that I lacked professional qualifications. You made those assumptions based on your preconceptions about elderly women and family dynamics." I spread out more documents across the table. Detailed business plans, client contracts, industry awards, and strategic partnerships that revealed the scope of my business operations and professional influence throughout the Chicago marketing industry. "I have been testing your character by allowing you to believe that I was powerless and dependent on your tolerance. Every instance of apparent boundary crossing, every moment of seeming inappropriate advice, every situation that required your patience and professional courtesy was carefully designed to reveal how you treat people when you believe they can't challenge your authority or affect your success. The effect of this revelation was immediate and catastrophic. Sandra's face went completely white as she began to understand the magnitude of what I was telling her and the implications for her professional future and personal relationships. "You've been pretending?" she whispered. "Sandra, for the past 3 years, I have been conducting the most comprehensive character assessment of my professional life. Every instance of apparent inappropriate advice, every demonstration of supposedly amateur knowledge, every boundary-crossing incident was strategically designed to test how you treat people when you believe they lack power and influence over your success." I spread out more documents across the table, detailed notes I had kept about our conversations, her decisions, and her attitudes toward my apparent limitations and professional contributions. I documented every conversation where you dismissed my expertise without investigation. I recorded every instance where you spoke to me, as if I were cognitively impaired, rather than professionally qualified. I noted every decision you made about managing my behavior based on your assumptions about my limitations, rather than respect for my potential contributions. Quote, David was staring at the documents with an expression of total shock and growing horror as he began to realize what my revelations meant about his wife's behavior and character over the past 3 years. "Mom, are you saying that there was nothing wrong with your understanding of business and professional matters? That you don't have boundary issues or inappropriate involvement in strategic decisions?" "David, there is absolutely nothing wrong with my understanding of professional practices or appropriate business boundaries. I have been managing a sophisticated marketing agency that serves Fortune 500 corporations, municipal governments, and nonprofit organizations throughout the Midwest." I pulled out my phone and showed them the client management and business development systems I use to coordinate agency operations and strategic planning across multiple market segments and geographic regions. "While you were discussing my apparent inability to understand appropriate boundaries, I was actually managing client relationships with the City of Chicago, the Illinois Tourism Board, and 17 major corporations including Boeing, Caterpillar, and McDonald's corporate headquarters." Sandra was reading through the client contracts and business development documents with increasing devastation as she realized that the, quote, inappropriate old woman she had been planning to limit and control was actually one of the most successful business leaders in Chicago's marketing industry. "But the amateur research," she said desperately, "the inappropriate questions about our strategic decisions, the boundary-crossing advice about professional and business planning." "Sandra, those weren't inappropriate questions from a confused elderly woman. They were professional assessments from someone who has spent 47 years developing expertise in every aspect of marketing strategy, client relationship management, and business development that affects the industry where you thought you were building your career. The detailed knowledge I demonstrated about market analysis, competitive positioning, and strategic planning weren't signs of boundary confusion. They were the routine observations of someone whose business success depends on understanding industry dynamics better than my competitors do." Quote, I reached into my briefcase one final time and withdrew a document that I placed directly in front of Sandra, a comprehensive analysis of her professional performance, character assessment, and employment evaluation that I had prepared based on 3 years of systematic observation and testing. "Sandra, this is my detailed assessment of your professional capabilities and personal character based on 3 years of careful evaluation. It includes specific documentation of your treatment of colleagues, your response to challenges, and your fundamental attitudes toward people you perceive as having limited power or influence over your success." Sandra's hands were shaking as she picked up the document and began reading. I watched her face change as she realized what the professional language and systematic analysis meant for her understanding of our relationship and her future at Morrison Associates. "According to this assessment," I continued, "you possess impressive professional skills and strategic thinking capabilities, but you have demonstrated character flaws that disqualify you from leadership positions that require integrity, respect for others, and collaborative decision-making with diverse perspectives and backgrounds." I began gathering the documents and returning them to my briefcase, preparing to leave the retirement party that had become the most important business meeting of my professional life. "The most important thing you need to understand," I continued, is that every assumption you made about my capabilities, my professional qualifications, and my authority over your career was not just wrong. It was deliberately tested and found to reveal character flaws that disqualify you from the respect and leadership opportunities you believed you had earned through talent and strategic planning. Where are you going? David asked, panic clear in his voice. I'm going home, David. To my office downtown, where I will continue managing Morrison Associates and making decisions about personnel, strategic direction, and business development based on professional competence and personal character, rather than family relationships and social expectations. Eleanor, please, Sandra said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Can't we talk about this? Can't we work something out? Sandra, there is nothing to work out. You spent 3 years demonstrating how you treat people when you believe they're powerless and unqualified. You revealed your character when you thought no one with authority was keeping score. And that character doesn't deserve to benefit from the business relationships and professional opportunities you tried to control through dismissal and condescension. But Sandra wasn't finished. In her desperation to salvage the situation, she made the one statement that would trigger the most devastating consequence of my entire character assessment. But we were trying to help you, Sandra protested, her voice rising with frustration and panic. We thought you were having problems with boundaries and realistic self-assessment. We thought we were doing what was best for you and the agency. And when you thought I couldn't defend myself or challenge your authority, I replied calmly, you chose social convenience over family respect, control over understanding, and management over acceptance. Those choices have consequences that will affect every aspect of your professional future. But then, Sandra made the fatal mistake that would cost her everything she had believed she was building at Morrison Associates. In her desperation and fury at being outmaneuvered by someone she had dismissed as powerless and irrelevant, she lost control completely and revealed the depths of her disrespect and contempt for people she viewed as obstacles, rather than family members deserving of dignity and professional courtesy. Eleanor, know your place, she screamed, her face contorted with rage at being outsmarted by someone she had considered intellectually inferior and professionally irrelevant. The silence that followed was absolute and profound as 200 guests witnessed Sandra's complete loss of control and total disrespect for her elderly mother-in-law during what was supposed to be a celebration of family transition and professional continuity. Then I reached into my briefcase one final time and withdrew the legal document that I had hoped I wouldn't need to use but had prepared as the ultimate consequence for the ultimate failure of character and family respect. Sandra, I said calmly, placing the document in her trembling hands. This is your termination notice from Morrison and Associates, effective immediately. It includes documentation of tonight's behavior as evidence of conduct unbecoming a professional representative of the agency. Quote, I gathered my materials and walked toward the exit of the Grand Ballroom, pausing to address the assembled guests one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this evening's celebration. I hope you've learned something valuable about the importance of treating people with respect, regardless of your assumptions about their capabilities or authority. I walked out of the Riverside Country Club carrying the same small briefcase I had brought with me that evening, but leaving behind a family and professional community whose assumptions about aging, respect, and family responsibility had just cost them access to a business empire they had never imagined existed under their own roof. 6 months later, I received a letter from David that showed he had finally understood the magnitude of his miscalculation and the character lessons that had cost his family everything they thought they were building together. Mom, he wrote, I filed for divorce from Sandra 2 weeks after the retirement party. I've spent every day since then thinking about what kind of person I had become during those 3 years, and what kind of person I married, who could humiliate a 70-year-old woman for revealing that she was more successful and accomplished than we had ever imagined. David went on to explain that Sandra had suffered a complete professional and social collapse when word spread throughout Chicago's business community about her treatment of me and her public humiliation of the founder and CEO of one of the city's most respected marketing agencies. I realize now that I didn't just lose access to a business empire I never knew about, David continued. I lost my relationship with the most accomplished woman I've ever known because I was too arrogant and assumption-driven to see who you really were, or treat you with the respect you deserved, regardless of what I thought your circumstances might be. David explained that he had enrolled in business graduate courses to understand the industry I had mastered, had begun volunteering with elder advocacy organizations to learn about respect and dignity for aging family members, and was working to become someone worthy of his children's respect and, potentially, someday, mine. I know I can never undo what happened or earn back your trust completely, he concluded. But I want you to know that your lesson about assumptions, respect, and character has changed how I think about family, aging, and the value of people whose capabilities might not be immediately obvious to people who think they understand professional hierarchies and family dynamics. I responded to David's letter with a carefully crafted business proposal. 6 months after that, David began working as a junior account executive at Morrison Associates, where he has spent the past year learning about professional excellence, client service, and the business expertise his mother had been trying to share with him all along. He has proven himself to be a capable marketer and a dedicated father who now teaches his children about respecting elderly people and never making assumptions about anyone's worth based on age, appearance, or circumstances. Sandra, meanwhile, left Chicago entirely and now works in small market digital marketing in a city where no one knows about her history of family disrespect or her catastrophic misjudgment of professional relationships and business authority. As for me, Morrison Associates has continued to grow and expand, now operating in 5 states and employing over 200 people. We recently opened our newest division focused specifically on elder advocacy marketing, helping organizations develop better approaches to respecting and utilizing the wisdom and experience of older adults in professional and family contexts. I also established the Blackwood Foundation for Family Dignity, which provides legal and professional support for elderly individuals who experience discrimination or disrespect from family members who mistake vulnerability for powerlessness and assumption for truth. The business card I placed on Sandra's dinner plate that October evening now hangs framed in my office, along with the termination notice that taught an entire family that respect isn't negotiable, dignity isn't conditional on perceived power, and treating people well isn't dependent on what you think they can do for you in return. The woman Sandra thought was an inappropriate old assistant who needed to know her place had taught her that assumptions about people's worth based on age, apparent circumstances, or perceived social status can be the most expensive mistakes you ever make, especially when the person you're underestimating has spent 70 years proving exactly how wrong those assumptions can be. This story is dedicated to every elderly person who has ever been dismissed, underestimated, or disrespected by people who should have known better. Remember that age brings wisdom, experience, and often professional accomplishments that younger people can't imagine. The most valuable lesson isn't about hidden wealth or secret power. It's about treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of what you think they can or cannot contribute to your success and happiness. And sometimes, the most important tests of character are the ones people don't know they're taking, until it's too late to change the results, and the consequences become permanent reminders of the importance of family respect, professional courtesy, and the fundamental human dignity that every person deserves, regardless of their age or apparent circumstances.